The espresso machine hissed at 6:47 in the morning, same as it always did. I stood at the kitchen counter in my socks watching the dark ribbon of coffee spiral into my mug, thinking about the presentation I had in 3 hours, thinking about the dry cleaning I'd forgotten to pick up, thinking about everything except the thing I should have been paying attention to for months. My husband was still upstairs. He told me the night before that he had a late start. Some internal meeting pushed to 10. I'd kissed him on the jaw before I left, same as always. He'd squeezed my hand without looking up from his phone. I'd been doing that math for a while and just refusing to add it up. I'm a project coordinator for a mid-sized architecture firm in downtown Portland. I was 29 when this happened. My husband, I'll call him my husband because that's what he still was, legally, on the day everything broke open, was 34. He worked in commercial real estate. We'd been married for 4 years and together for 6. We had a dog named Pepper, a mortgage in a neighborhood we'd stretched for, and a life that looked exactly right from the outside. I need to say that because what happened later might make it seem like I was naive. I wasn't naive. I was busy, and I was trusting someone who had spent years making himself trustworthy. There's a difference. The thing that started unraveling it wasn't dramatic. It was a receipt. I found it in the pocket of his jacket when I was taking a load to the dry cleaner, the same dry cleaner I'd forgotten to visit, which meant I was going through a pile of his clothes he'd asked me to drop off twice already. The receipt was from a restaurant I knew, a nice one, the kind we used to go to on anniversaries. Dinner for 2, a bottle of wine, a dessert. A Tuesday night in March when he'd told me he had a client dinner and would be home late. He had been home late. He just hadn't told me who the client was. I stood in our laundry room holding that receipt for a long time. I didn't cry. I just stood there, running the edges between my fingers, thinking about all the other Tuesdays. All the other late nights. The way his phone screen had started facing down on the table. The way he'd started laughing differently, a little too quickly, like he was performing ease. I put the receipt in my own coat pocket. I didn't say anything. I went to work. That was 3 weeks before I found out everything. I want to be clear about why I waited. It wasn't weakness. It wasn't fear. I was an architecture major before I shifted into project management, and the one thing I carried from that training is this: you do not demolish a structure until you have the full blueprint. You do not swing the sledgehammer until you know exactly what's load-bearing. I needed to know what I was actually dealing with. I started paying attention in a different way. Not obsessive, not constant, just present. I noticed that his energy shifted on certain days of the week, Thursdays especially. He'd come home on Thursdays with a specific kind of quiet about him, the kind that isn't tired but is satisfied, and I had mistaken it for contentment for years. I understood now that it was something else entirely. I checked our shared cloud account. We'd set it up years ago to share photos, never really thought about it since. There were location pings still syncing from an app we'd installed when we went camping and wanted to track each other on the trail. He'd forgotten it was still running. Thursdays, a neighborhood across the river. An address that came up when I mapped it as a condo complex, built in 2019. Modern. The kind of building with a rooftop deck and a gym and a concierge. I looked up who lived there. The name that came back, through a property search I had every legal right to run, was someone I recognized. Not a stranger. Not some unknown woman I could make faceless in my mind. My husband's colleague. His work partner, technically. They co-listed properties together. She was in half the photos on his firm's website, standing beside him at ribbon cuttings and client events, both of them in blazers, both of them smiling at the camera. I had met her at a company holiday party 2 years before. She'd shaken my hand and told me my husband spoke so highly of me. She'd held eye contact just a beat too long when she said it. I had filed that moment away and told myself I was being paranoid. I was not being paranoid. I took a Thursday off work. I told my manager I had a dentist appointment and a migraine coming on. I drove to the condo complex and I sat in a coffee shop across the street with my laptop open, looking like someone who was just working remotely, and I waited. He arrived at 12:23 in the afternoon, He was carrying a bag from a grocery store, the good one, the one we never went to because it was too expensive. He had a bottle of wine tucked under his arm. He was wearing the green shirt I'd given him for his birthday. I watched him walk through the lobby doors. I sat very still and I let myself feel the full weight of what I was looking at. I didn't let myself minimize it or explain it away. I had spent a long time giving things the most charitable interpretation possible, and I was done with that. I let it land. Then I opened my phone and I started recording. I wasn't reckless about it. I didn't go up to the door. I didn't confront anyone. I simply documented what I could document from a public space. His arrival, his demeanor, the wine, the grocery bag. I already had the location data. I already had the receipt. I was building something I could stand on. He left just under 2 hours later. He kissed her at the entrance of the lobby. Not a quick kiss, not a see you later kiss, the kind that told me everything about how long this had been going on and how comfortable they had become with it. She was wearing a robe. He was carrying the empty wine bag. I drove home and made dinner. I want to talk about that period, the weeks between knowing and acting, because I think people misunderstand what it's like to hold that kind of information. They think you must be devastated, and I was. Underneath everything, I was gutted. But grief doesn't stop your brain from working. If anything, grief sharpened me. I became very focused. I slept badly but thought clearly. I ate less and noticed more. I quietly opened a personal checking account at a different bank. I made copies of our financial documents, tax returns, investment statements, the mortgage paperwork. I called a family law attorney using my office phone on my lunch break and had a 45-minute consultation. I did not tell my husband. I did not tell my friends. I did not tell my sister because my sister would have told me to confront him immediately and I was not ready to hand over control of the timeline. The attorney told me what I needed. Documentation of the affair, financial records, evidence of assets. She also told me something that I have thought about many times since. The spouse who is prepared is the spouse who is protected. I was going to be prepared. The moment I chose to record inside the house was a Saturday morning in April. He'd told me he was going to the gym and then stopping by the office to catch up on paperwork. He said it easily, the way people say things they've said so many times it no longer registers as a lie. He kissed me on the forehead. He smelled like the same shampoo he'd used for 6 years. I'd set up my laptop camera to run a background recording application. Nothing hidden in walls, nothing invasive. Just my own laptop and my own home on the kitchen counter where it usually sat, running an application I had downloaded and paid for. He didn't go to the gym. He came back 40 minutes later, and he was not alone. She walked through our front door wearing sunglasses and carrying a coffee. She walked through our front door like she had been there before. Like the layout was familiar. Like she knew which way to turn. I was not home. I had left 20 minutes before, on purpose, after starting the recording. I had gone to a bookstore 3 miles away and sat in the cafe section and stared at a book I didn't read for 2 hours, waiting. What I came home to, later, on the recording, was worse than I had let myself imagine, but it also gave me exactly what I needed. I didn't fall apart. I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and I watched the footage and I felt something shift inside me from grief into something harder and quieter. Purposeful. I saved the file in 3 places. I emailed it to myself and to a cloud backup. I sent a compressed copy to the attorney. Then I did something that probably looked, from the outside, like nothing. I made dinner. I waited for him to come home. I said hello. I asked about his day. He told me the gym had been crowded and the office had been quiet. He asked what we were having. I said, chicken. He said, great. I looked at him across the table and thought, I know something you don't know. I know. And I'm going to be very careful about how I use it. The next week at work, I was pulled into a contract dispute between our firm and a subcontractor. It was the kind of meeting that requires absolute focus. Technical documents, legal language, competing claims. I sat in that conference room for 4 hours and didn't think about my marriage once. I was good at my job. I had always been good at my job. It occurred to me, not for the first time, that I had been pouring a significant amount of energy into a relationship and a person who had been pouring his into someone else, and that I was going to get all of that back. My attorney filed the preliminary paperwork on a Wednesday. My husband found out on a Thursday because I handed him the documents myself in our kitchen at 7 in the morning before he'd had his coffee. I had chosen the timing deliberately. I wanted him unprepared. I wanted to be the one holding the information while he scrambled to catch up. He stared at the papers. He went through about 4 different expressions in 10 seconds. Confusion, then understanding, then a flash of something that might have been guilt, then, finally, the expression I'd expected. Calculation. He was already thinking about how to manage it. "We should talk," he said. "We are talking," I said. "This is me talking." He asked how long I'd known. I told him long enough. He asked if we could sit down, and I told him I preferred to stand. He asked if there was any chance we could, and I stopped him there. I told him I had documentation. I told him I had spoken to an attorney. I told him I had financial records and I had already begun the process, and that the most useful thing he could do at this point was cooperate. He asked about her, using her name, which was the first time her name had been spoken out loud in our house, and I noticed that my hands didn't shake when I heard it. That was when I knew I had done the work right. He asked if I'd told anyone. I said not yet. That not yet did exactly what I needed it to do. What happened after that is where the story takes a turn that I still have trouble explaining to people, because it sounds too precise to be real. But it was real. I was there. 3 weeks into the divorce process, I was at my attorney's office for a document review. My attorney, a sharp, methodical woman who I had come to deeply trust, mentioned that the opposing counsel had been in contact. My husband had hired a lawyer. Standard. Expected. What was not expected was who he'd hired. The attorney representing my husband in our divorce was a man named Gerald Cahill. Mid-50s, reputable, known for high-asset divorce cases. My attorney mentioned his name in passing and I wrote it down without much thought. That night I looked him up, the way you look up anything. Out of habit, out of due diligence. His firm's website listed his associates and partners, standard bio pages, headshots, areas of practice. I was scrolling through the associate listings when I stopped. There was a name I recognized. Not because I'd met her professionally, because I'd grown up down the street from her family, because she'd been 2 years ahead of me in school and I'd always thought she was one of the most principled people I'd ever encountered, because her last name was the same as my husband's. His younger sister had been working at the opposing law firm for 2 years. Let me be precise about what this meant. My husband's attorney was the senior partner at a firm where my husband's own sister was an associate. Whether he had known and chosen the firm deliberately to keep it in a network he could control, or whether it was coincidence, I didn't know. What I knew was that she was there, and she was going to see everything. I didn't call her. I didn't reach out. I kept that information the same way I had kept everything else. Carefully, quietly, until I knew what to do with it. What I did not expect was that she would call me. She called on a Sunday afternoon from her personal cell phone, and she identified herself immediately. She told me she had become aware of her involvement in the case through the firm's intake process. She told me she had not known, when she started at the firm, that this case was coming. She told me she was aware of the conflict of interest. And then she said something that I have thought about many times since. She said, "I need you to know that I'm not calling to ask for anything. I'm calling because I think you deserve to know the truth about a few things, and I'm the only person in a position to tell you." I sat down on my back porch and I held the phone with both hands and I listened. She told me about conversations she had overheard, about a meeting at the firm, before the divorce filing, before any of this was official, where her brother had come in to speak with the senior partner privately. A meeting that should not have happened. A meeting where certain details about marital assets had been discussed in a way that suggested the intent to move funds before the legal process could catch them. She had taken notes. Not because she had planned to use them, but because she was a lawyer, and lawyers take notes, and some part of her had understood in that moment that what she was hearing was wrong. She had those notes, and she was willing to share them. I need to tell you what that felt like. To receive that phone call from that woman, to understand that the person who had every reason to protect her brother had instead chosen to protect the truth. It didn't feel triumphant. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like gravity, like something that had been suspended in the air for a long time was finally being allowed to fall. I cried, actually, right there on the porch with the dog leaning against my legs. I didn't cry about my husband. I cried because of her, because she had done something hard and right without anyone asking her to. I thanked her. She told me not to thank her yet because there was still work to do. There was a lot of work to do. My attorney was on the phone with me within an hour of my conversation with her. What the sister had documented constituted potential evidence of financial misconduct during divorce proceedings, the kind of thing that shifts a case significantly, the kind of thing that, when handed to a judge, changes the entire posture of the opposing party. My husband did not know, when he walked into the mediation session 4 weeks later, that we had any of this. He walked in with his senior partner attorney and his careful expression and his prepared talking points. He had been structured and cooperative on paper, the way people are when they believe they have already hidden the things they wanted to hide. He sat across the table from me, and he looked, for the first time in months, like he was in control. He was not in control. When my attorney laid out the financial documentation, the transfers, the timeline, the notated discrepancies, the room went quiet in a very particular way. It's the kind of quiet that happens when someone realizes the game they were playing had an audience they didn't know about. He looked at his attorney. His attorney, to his credit, kept his expression neutral. But he did not look surprised, and I noticed that. The mediation did not go the way my husband had planned. I am not going to detail every number, because that's not the point of this. The point is that by the time the final agreement was signed, I had the house. I had a fair division of the assets that had not been moved. I had documentation of what had been moved, and an agreement around restoration. I had my name on things my name deserved to be on. I also had, for the first time in 6 years, a very clear picture of who I had been married to and what I had been willing to overlook. That clarity was worth more than any of the financial terms. My husband never apologized. I didn't expect him to. Some people don't have the capacity for accountability. They have the capacity for management, for damage control, for performing whatever is strategically useful in a given moment. I had married someone like that without fully understanding it, and understanding it now was its own kind of gift, even if it was a painful one. His colleague, I suppose I should say, the woman he'd been with, I don't know what happened with them. I stopped tracking it. That part of the story stopped being mine. His sister left the firm not long after the mediation. She sent me one text when it was over. It said, "I'm glad it went the way it did. Take care of yourself." I've kept that text. I've read it more times than I can count. I stayed in Portland. I kept the dog. I kept the house. And in the first month I was living in it. Alone, I repainted the kitchen a color that I had wanted for 2 years, and my husband had called too much. It's a deep sage green. It's the first thing I see every morning when I come down for coffee. I went back to the attorney's office 6 months later, not for the divorce, which was finalized, but to update my estate documents. I wanted everything in order. My attorney asked me how I was doing, and I told her I was good, and I meant it in a way I hadn't meant anything in a long time. I want to say something to anyone who's listening to this and recognizing something in their own life, the part before you have evidence, the part where you're just holding a receipt in a laundry room and trying to decide if your instincts are telling you the truth. They are. You don't have to blow everything up immediately. You don't have to perform your pain. You are allowed to be strategic. You are allowed to take your time. You are allowed to build something solid before you swing the sledgehammer. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the people you least expect will be the ones who hand you exactly what you need, not because they owe you anything. Because some people still choose to do the right thing, even when it costs them. Prepare yourself. Document everything. Find an attorney you trust. And don't let anyone, not even the person who sleeps next to you, convince you that you didn't see what you saw. The espresso machine still hisses at 6:47 in the morning. I still stand at the kitchen counter in my socks. But now, when I wrap my hands around my mug and look out the window, I'm not thinking about dry cleaning or presentations or someone else's Thursdays. I'm thinking about what I'm going to do next, and it's mine.